Right then, good afternoon from a very, very sunny London on the warmest day of the year so far. My name's Steve Bailey. I'm a games market analyst with a company called OMDIA, a role that I've been in for almost 15 years now. Before that, I used to be a games journalist and also spent a few years as a mathematician. And throughout all that time, I've struggled with certain mental health challenges, particularly anxiety and imposter syndrome, which we'll be talking about today. I'm also going to be off camera, I'm afraid, because my home broadband is terrible, and I would prefer that the priority is the presentation and not my face. So before anything else, there is something that I want to make clear. And that is, I am not a mental health professional. I am simply somebody who is sharing their experiences in the hope that it can help you somehow. This is not a replacement for seeking professional support, okay? Just to be clear, I mean it. I love having this chance to talk to you, but your mental health goes far, far beyond this conversation. Okay? Okay. Right, with that sorted, we can move on to one of the biggest parts of my life, one of the biggest relationships in my life, which is anxiety. And before I talk about anxiety in specific terms, there are some general issues to cover that I think affect all of us. The first issue is that companies pay a lot of lip service to mental health, but I'm not sure if many of them are yet following through to a great degree on those intentions. A lot of the support we see is still notional rather than functional. And I think ultimately they're going to have to bite that bullet and start investing directly rather than tangentially. It's going to be a short-term cost, no doubt, but one with plenty of long-term benefits. Second issue is that our conversations about mental health are still somewhat limited. I'm in my 40s, I'm aged 43, thank you very much. And I often forget that my parents' generation didn't even have the concept of mental health to work with. Either you kept your mouth shut and your head down and you got through things somehow, or you fell apart, usually in private, with all kinds of consequences for yourself that you love. This is changing very quickly, and I'm very, very glad to see that it's changing. And I think everyone who's pushing that conversation forward should be thanked. But it still has a lot of distance to cover. Third problem is that arguably over much of the past century, especially where consumerism and technology is concerned, they've been engines that have been largely driven by anxiety. And I don't know about you, but it feels like we can't afford to work this way much longer. It feels to me like a similar situation to fossil fuels, in that we use such fuel to drive so much growth in the 20th century. But there were consequences for that. And we're now facing those consequences after they've been looming for many decades. It feels like we're in a similar situation with anxiety. There's only so much stress that could be piled on people before costs begin to outweigh the benefits. Finally, we have this idea of sensitivity, in that people can have varying sensitivities when it comes to all aspects of our existence, be it noise, processing information, or whatever. And while I think the business world is gradually beginning to make room for this idea, I think our wider society is much less concerned. So take the way that houses are built, for example. Sound pollution, whether from neighbors or traffic, can have huge impacts on certain people like me. And who doesn't want a nice, peaceful space to live in, to recharge and recover in? And yet, when I visit the homes of friends who've just bought a fancy new house in some picturesque area, the walls and ceilings are like cardboard. And that is absolutely hellish to me. There is so little attention being paid to the kinds of sensitivity that can drive our anxieties because the economic story is still transfixed on growth. But here's the thing, excuse me. Anxiety is baked into so much of what we do and are expected to do for work these days. As a business analyst, it's a huge part of my job to visualize future outcomes and discuss the possibility of them happening. And the same is true of most of the business side of the games world and other industries, of course. We work to offset risk, but that risk manifests in us, in people, as fear and insecurity. After dealing with this stuff for so many years, my feeling is that some anxiety is maybe necessary, maybe useful, in the same way that stress is arguably good for the organism. It's just we have so little way of understanding when that level of anxiety becomes problematic. There are very few sources trying to teach us how to coexist with anxiety, and so it gets to run roughshod over us. If I'm finishing a major project of my work or having an involved discussion with a client, then a burst of concern can really work wonders in terms of diligence or spotting mistakes or prepping for difficult questions or whatever. The problem is that my brain then remains in that state of high anxiety for quite some time afterward, and no one is there to help me come down from that, to consolidate that anxiety and stow away that nervous energy. If the person was there to do that, that would solve so many problems for me if there was a professional, someone there to help limit that anxiety after being in an anxious event. It does seem pretty incredible to me, given that stressful projects are core to our work lives, especially in the games world, that the institutions that many of us work for are not more cognizant of this process and attempting to formalize the anxieties that can be involved. In my line of work as a games market analyst, there's this expectation that my work is supposed to help people make better sense of the future. That doesn't mean we try to predict the future, but instead we try to define and explore plausible scenarios. And our clients understand this, so the most valuable part of our work isn't a chart showing the market value going up or consumer spending that we're forecasting, but the discussion we have to explain our thinking. This relationship can be very satisfying, very edifying, although some clients are less patient than others, shall we say. The problem is when your professional self-esteem is linked up to your ability to exist out on a limb, which is a process that's exposed to all kinds of outcomes and mishaps that may be beyond our control. We may be wrong or misguided for reasons that it was just impossible to anticipate given the nature of the work. And again, it's not like that is ever part of the training. It is just put down to this nebulous concept of experience. Now, let's talk specifically about games, an industry that I've been involved in directly for some 20 years now. I've met so many wonderful people who know incredible amounts about this medium, and they love their work so much. But I also know plenty of people who've had to move to more stable positions in other industries in order to preserve their mental or physical health, or both. I find working in games to be somewhat similar to living in a city, you know. I've lived in and around central London for 15 years now, and it's a fantastic place to be. But you have to remain aware of the fact that no matter how much you love the city, it might not love you back in a similar way. And I think the same is true of games, where every degree of enthusiasm casts its own shadow that you have to maintain awareness of and try to develop a responsibility for that kind of commitment you give to it. Over the years, I felt very frustrated with how restless the games landscape is. Can it not just, sit still for 5 minutes, let people catch breath just for a moment? But nope, everything hurtles onwards, and instability persists nearly everywhere. Even in like large game publishers, people's prospects and positions can change severely on a dime, and it's very, very unhealthy. So if you do commit yourself on your life to this industry, please remember to look after yourself as part of that commitment, okay? Because the games world does chew through people, especially younger folk, without a second thought. One final slide here about anxiety, and it's about the complexity of the nature of work. And I think that affects all of us. So what you see on the screen is a formalization of the various elements that make up my role as a market analyst. As far as the gaming public sees, an analyst is somebody who pops up to give some quotes and charts in a news article that are often regarded as dubious, and that's that. But behind the scenes, the work we do spans numerous skill sets. And each of those skill sets is elaborating and interacting because of advances in technology. Now, this applies especially to business and technical roles, but also even goes to cover creative roles. What people see as your output and what actually goes into that output are two very, very different things. Even if your job is around generating art assets or animation or designing narrative, whatever, you are expected to become familiar with all kinds of tools, which themselves are evolving all the time. And not just tools directly related to your output, but how work is managed, how your time is workflowed, how you relate to colleagues. And the costs of all this can be significant. But once again, they're rarely made explicit. You just have to learn how to deal. And that's that. Right, how are we doing for time? Good, 10 minutes, perfect. We now move on to imposter syndrome, which can be summarized as constantly aggressively doubting my ability to be any good at my work. So in rational terms, on the surface, there are lots of signs that I'm good at my job and that it's something that I could do well and deserve to be paid for. But of course, that's all irrelevant in the face of the syndrome itself. So in rational terms, I have not been fired yet. People pay money to access my work. The media is interested in what I have to say. And the same for industry contacts as well. But this is not, of course, a rational place. So when it comes to combating, when all you do is cast massive, constant doubt over any and all signs that you're actually good at your job, even after all these years, it's just constant and tiring. But I will say that aging has helped a little. My brain has slowed down as I've gotten older, and some days I simply forget to give myself a hard time. Those are good days. So when it comes to combating imposter syndrome, structured reassurance can help a certain amount, I'm sure, but you have to be careful with how it's implemented and what it focuses on. The right kind of feedback can help keep you focused, find the right places to direct your energy. But it's not easy, it's far from simple, because every tool for self-improvement can also sometimes be turned on its head and start to feel like a reason to doubt yourself, such is the relentless nature of how insecurity works. I will say this though, after all my years, everything still feels so crazy and such a mess. There's never been a time in my life where I've been perfectly on top of things, and I don't think there ever will be. And you know what? I think that might be okay. So finally, what can we do about all of this difficult stuff? I'm going to keep my advice to a minimum, as this was supposed to be about sharing experience. But I will say that one of the greatest ironies of the ways we currently live, almost like a cosmic punchline, is that the things we have the most in common, that is our fears and insecurities, are the things we are most encouraged to hide from one another. That seems so ridiculous. It's not a formula for a healthy existence. And we need to do what we can to change that. Now, understanding certain negative tendencies of our brains has been very useful for me, because when you can put a name to a problem, you can discuss it much more easily. For example, I like to remember the spotlight effect, which means that people mostly don't remember things the way you do. When you think back to something that embarrasses you, odds are no one but you remembers it that way, or in the kind of detail you do, with yourself at the center of that focus. There's also the concept of apophenia, which is the habit of spotting patterns that aren't actually there. The thing is, our brains love doing that. They're kind of addicted to spotting patterns. And so much of our work these days is based around paying people to be professional pattern spotters. But it once again comes down to the fact that even though you're paid to do this for a job, no one is there to tell your brain when to stop. So it's not really the pattern spotting that is the issue, more the culture with which we surround such skill sets. Finally, we come to what I think is one of the most empowering things you could do to look after your mental health, and that is reading. I'm a big fan of actual books, physical books, not out of fetishism, but because they are a really powerful format for absorbing a long form argument, which is something our modern lives generally lack. So on the left, you have an example of the many books out there that try to help you navigate this complex and alienating world that we live in. But also on the right, you'll see a book written by C.S. Lewis back in 1942, almost 80 years ago now. This book is a collection of fictional letters of advice written from a senior demon to a junior demon on the best way to torment people. Now, what's incredible about this book is that it reads like a manifesto of how to be horrible to people online. And what I love about it is that it illustrates how little things have changed in terms of our more problematic tendencies. And I find that oddly reassuring, you know? The more I read about the 20th century and how little things have changed, the less panicked I feel about the 21st century. Maybe you don't feel the same way, but it's another way in which books have been good for my mental health. Now, I finished a bit ahead of time, so I have a section at the end, which is a bonus section, where I'm going to talk about emotional labor for a few minutes. I'm sure you're aware of the idea of emotional labor. If not, it is the emotional equivalent of physical labor. It is something that lots of jobs have a high quotient of, where you are required to process a lot of emotions in order to deal with other people. And as you see here, the service industry is a good example of that. And one thing to note about emotional labor is that we don't really account for it in job descriptions or even salaries. Emotional labor is important in my line of work because we get complex demands arriving with little notice. And if you are up against it for a deadline or you're busy with something else, then it can be quite difficult to process that. It can make you, you know, a bit on edge, a bit anxious, even a bit angry, and you have to deal with that. And much like many other things in this talk, you've never been taught how to deal with that. So as an analyst, and I think in most technical jobs, you're pulled in many directions in terms of the emotional labor involved. The topic you're covering is increasing in depth, which means the clients are demanding more and more of you in terms of performance. You have internal accountability in terms of sales and management performance. You have your role itself, which is changing because of the technology involved and the possibilities of what you do. And finally, at the bottom, the context of the topic is changing. You think about games and how that's changed in the past 30 years, where the industry in the 90s went from a place where games were sold in boxes to be played on PCs or consoles, to the current situation we have now, which is a continuum of devices, business models, distribution methods. That is a massive ramp up in complexity, and my pay is not ramped up in a similarly effective style. Finally, I want to go back to my time as a games journalist back in 2002 through to 2008. When you are a games writer, back in that period, you would write for magazines rather than websites. And you wouldn't get much feedback at all, apart from on internet forums. And what would happen there is that people would not read your reviews, but they would see the scores you gave games when a new issue comes out. And they would just basically insult you, flat insult you to not to your face, but just say the worst things about you. And because you were desperately seeking feedback, you would find this stuff and you would read it. And it was a lot to process. And I have to say that if I didn't move away from reviewing into becoming an analyst in 2007 or so, I think my mental health would have suffered quite badly. Right. That is all from me. I'm going to move on and share my screen. And we have up next Dr. Failan. Has Dr. Lam arrived yet?
Yes, he's here.
Oh, excellent. Okay. Right, then I should go on mute and I will see you all in the speakers lounge at 3 p.m. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
So, hello, everybody. Thank you so much for coming today. Unfortunately, I'm working from my hospital at the moment, so I do apologize. The screen is not the best. Can you hear me, or is there any issues with that whatsoever?
No, that's fine.
Fantastic. Okay, so hi, my name is Failam. I'm a consultant liaison psychiatrist working over at King's College Hospital. And part of what I do is look at the physical and mental health interface of how mental well-being can impact upon physical well-being as well. But that's my day job. My other part of what I enjoy is video games. And I'm part of a charity called Gaming the Mind, which looks at the interface between video games and mental health and mental well-being. But today, what I want to talk about is burnout. So Burnout, what is it? Well, thinking back to myself, this was going back about nearly 4 years ago. I just felt tired. I was working as a doctor in a busy London hospital, and although I enjoyed the work which I was doing, I just felt totally exhausted. I was at a crossroads of my training. I was going to become a consultant within the next year or so, 5 years of medical school, over a decade of being a junior doctor. I just felt drained. And this was not something unique to myself. It's quite unique to a lot of healthcare professionals and a lot of people in any sort of job. So let's talk about burnout. So what is burnout? Well, burnout, if you go back to the 1960s, 1970s, was an informal term. It was first used to refer to people with long-term substance misuse issues, such as alcohol or heroin, and their presentation after long-term usage. And when they said somebody had burnt out, it was somebody who was, limited engagement, just sort of closed in. However, in 1971, it was first used to describe exhaustion in air traffic controllers. And what it noted was even then that there was associated deterioration in the quality and the quantity of the work which they were producing. It was further popularized and conceptualized by an American psychologist called Herbert Freudenberg. I hope I pronounced it correctly. During which he was describing staff who worked in these American free clinics, be it for substance misuse or for sexual health, and how working in these sort of environments can lead to feelings of exhaustion. Over time, the concept of burnout was conceptualized into three main components. It talked about 1, exhaustion, 2, feelings of cynicism, and 3, a sense of ineffectiveness, that what you're doing is just not contributing to anything. And there is a lot of research into burnout within healthcare professionals. However, this is not an issue which focuses on healthcare professionals alone. If we look back, game developers, one of the magazines, did a quality of life survey for people working within game development realm in 2013. And what it found was that over time, a significant number of developers will feel less likely that they have any meaningful impact on the game which they're developing. And this was showed with a correlation towards low motivation, low job satisfaction, and over time, people leaving the jobs which they were doing. And let's not be mistaken, careers in game development do require a large commitment of time, of energy, of passion. There was an IGDA developer satisfaction survey done in 2019, which showed that game developers were generally highly educated individuals working in very specialized and training in very specialized programs relevant to game design or game development. For many, as mentioned earlier on, you invest a lot of your time, your energy into this field. And it's interesting to note that within this study as well in 2019, that even people who had left the industry, who were unable to find employment in the industry, overwhelmingly wanted to return to it. However, this industry also has its downsides. High rates of job changes, large demands on employees' contributions of time and energy, a lack of security, be it through pensions or be it through secure employment. And I think this is where the narrative of burnout often gets quite muddied and gets quite stigmatized. You often hear people, when they talk about people who are burnt out in the industry, as not being able to make it. They just weren't of the right sort. They weren't cutting it, not resilient enough, not strong enough. And that's just wrong. Freudenberg put it best about 50 years ago, and I'm going to sort of quote him because, to be honest with you, his ability of language far exceeds mine. The people who are most prone to burnout are the dedicated and the committed. And what he said was people who are dedicated and committed would rather put up than to shut up, like shut in. So what we do is we put our talent, our skills. What we put up is long hours with bare minimum financial compensation. And it's precisely because we are dedicated that we walk into this burnout trap. We work too much, too long, and too intensely. And the guilt of not doing enough can then lead to one even further giving more. And this in turn leads to exhaustion. And we see this all the time in our fields of work. Think of your colleague who siphons off all the additional work without complaint or question, who stays in until 2 or 3 a.m. every single day and then comes in at 7 a.m. the next morning. The ones who quietly beaver on until things fall apart. So how do we manage it? What do we do? What can we do? Well, again, for a long time, burnout's narrative was about it being the individual's responsibility. The individual needs to take steps to address it. You know, you need to be more mindful, you need to be more resilient, you need to choose to take time away from work. And although self-care is important, the reality is that burnout stems from a systematic issue as opposed to an individual issue. There was a write-up done in the Harvard Business Review recently, which showed that the top 5 reasons for burnout often stem from issues within the workplace itself. This includes unfair treatment at work, unmanageable workloads, lack of role clarity, lack of communication, time pressures. This suggests that often these issues don't stem from the individual, but stems from everything around it, the culture around the organization. So at the start of this current pandemic, since over a year ago, within healthcare professionals, as I said, we were very mindful of the risk of burnout within our workforce. Hospital I worked in started looking at how we could address this and how we could support our employees during this difficult time. So what we did was we set up a multi-tiered approach in helping everyone. So at the basic level, we talked about things like self-care, social and peer and team-based support. In terms of self-care, the initial stages was being able for the staff to talk openly about the anxieties and stress which they can face. We talked about the symptoms which can come about as well under these sort of stressful conditions, insomnia, burnout, fatigue, anxieties, feelings of guilt. And that's part of it, is to open up the narrative so that people can talk about stuff like this. We also highlighted the needs of self-care. I think sometimes when people are under pressure, they believe that the only way is to sort of persevere on to the detriment of everything else. Well, actually, what we need to do is ensure that people get sufficient rest, food, be able to do enjoyable activities. And it's also helping people recognize unhealthy coping mechanisms, be it drinking heavily at the job, using drugs, for example. And all of this also talks about being connected to everybody around you, be it socially, be it your peers, your friends, even your colleagues, and to be able to ground yourself in what makes this so important when everything else seems so chaotic. But apart from the things which we talked about the individual doing, we also talked about things which the employer can do. So things which were done includes chill out spaces within the hospital, spaces where people could decompress, especially during particularly challenging times. But part of what we also did to help alleviate burnout within the hospital was looking towards changing the culture. So what we did was we trained up our team leaders, upskilled them, asked our leaders within the organization to be role models in ensuring there's good self-care. I think, again, there's often a trap of leaders within teams, again, reflecting upon the teams that you have worked within, who will then work longer hours and be even more stressed out. And all it does is becomes a model which other junior colleagues will then model as well. And we know that this doesn't lead to good outcomes. It leads to poorer outputs, it leads to poorer health outcomes as well for our staff. Other things which we looked at for our staff members was to ensure that, again, we talked about communication, being clear, being able to conceptualize distress, being able to talk about distress, being able to say to a colleague, I'm not well, I need some time away. And this culture of allowing people to speak up, to talk up. We also asked the team to reflect upon the culture of what you're trying to develop within your service as well. Is what you're doing a culture of blame or criticism, or is it a supportive sort of culture? We also taught people to become aware of when team members are becoming more quiet, more withdrawn, and how important it is to tell people that, are you okay? To ask them. I think sometimes there's a fear within everybody that by asking people about how they're doing, it could make things worse. I can say as a fact, no, it doesn't. We also did more practical skills, so things like active listening, being aware of everybody having their own difficulties, having their own baggage, which they have to put into place as well. And so that was the primary care level stuff. The second part was secondary prevention. So what we did was having reflective practice groups, targeted resources for mental health support. We also ensured that there was clear pathways if somebody needed support, how they can find it, be it through occupational health, be it through NHS mental health support systems as well. All this required investment of time, of money, of resources from the trust. And thankfully, the hospital which I was working in was willing to invest that. But I know I'm talking about this in terms of healthcare services, but this is not alone something which only hospitals are able to implement. For example, we know that there's a developer called Jagax who does RuneScape, who actively looks to reducing such issues within their organization. They work together with Mind, one of the charities, to implement well-being activities and programs within their company. This includes practical things like ensuring mental health services is included in their staff health insurance. They have done similarly of upskilling their managers to ensure that they can help implement workforce interventions and being mindful of their employees' needs. So why is this all important? You know, I think sometimes people go, oh, well, it's something which people can find outside work. The reality is that most of us spend a lot of our life within work, a lot of our support structures, a lot of our communities within the work setting as well. And I always believe that by saying that it can be done outside work, it's just passing the buck. It's passing the responsibility on. As employers, you have a responsibility of employees to make sure that they're well, mentally well. From an organization's perspective, the evidence suggests that burnout leads to poorer outcomes for their work, for individuals' work, and that comes no surprise to anybody. If you feel less vested, you feel less motivated, you feel exhausted, your work is going to be poorer. Furthermore, there's healthcare policy research which has demonstrated that well-being programs implemented within an organization can lead to improved health benefits for your staff. But we can talk about it from an organization perspective, from your employer's perspective. But the important thing is about the individual's perspective. I feel that, and I believe strongly, that such programs help open a dialogue about mental health to destigmatize it a little bit. I always find it strange, being a practicing doctor, that when I ask somebody about their past medical history, people are more than willing to tell me about the tonsillitis which they had when they were 10 years old, or the fractured leg they had when they were 6. But no one talks about the depression, the anxiety which they have, even though that can impact upon their day-to-day living a lot more than a lot of the other things we have had. And I think by being able to talk about it, it helps prevent the mind-body split, that allows the dialogue to carry on. I personally find it very tragic when somebody falls out of love of something which they're passionate about before in the past. And this is no fault of their own, but due to the systems and not being supportive for them. I truly believe that such implementations can help people maintain a better quality of mental well-being and mental health. In terms of my own story, well, I was fortunate enough that I was able to take a year out to teach. I went to teach at a university about mental health and mental well-being, and I was able to find the things which I was passionate about my career and the things which I believe was important in my career. And I was able to return back to being a fully practicing doctor later on down the line. I'm currently one of the doctors working in King's still. But that is my talk. If anybody has any questions you'd like to ask me, any queries, I think there's a question and answer session later on. Otherwise, do get in touch with me through our Twitter feed. Yeah, I think that's me done. Thank you very much for everybody's time. I'm not sure whether I should introduce the next speakers now, but I've ended about 6 minutes early, or should I hold off and maybe take a break?
We're happy to
Thank
go.
you. We'll hand over to Rosie and Sarah now. Thank you.
Ah, fantastic. Okay, just quickly introducing Rosie and Sarah. So I've not met Rosie and Sarah personally, but I know they're part of this organization called Safe in Our World, who have done great work actually. So like I said, we are part of a charity called Gaming the Mind, and Safe in Our World is a charity as well, who has done great work in outreaching with the industry and with the general public as well. I believe they'll probably be able to talk about their work a lot more than I can, but yeah, I thought I'd use it as a brief introduction for their team.
Thank you. Yeah, hi. Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Dr. Lamb. Yes, indeed, we do work with Game in the Mind, and funnily enough, I have a meeting with them later. Yes, that's a really good introduction. So hi, my name is Sarah Sorrell, and I'm one of the charity officers for Safe in Our World. I joined the organisation last September, just at the same time as Rosie. So we're the first employees for Safe in Our World. My background is 20 plus years of working in the charity sector, but not in the video games industry. I'm actually from the sports sector, and I worked in golf. So this is very different, and I'm slowly learning the industry, and it's not quite as big as I thought it was to start with. It seems a lot of people know each other, but mental health isn't new to me. Always been a massive advocate of mental health. And previously worked on some initiatives sort of trying to promote mental health with children and using golf as the vehicle. So I'm very, very happy to be at the beginning of the journey with Safe in Our World. And I'm looking forward to telling you a little bit more about that as we go through our part of the talk today. But in the meantime, let me just pass you over to Rosie to say hello and give you a quick bit of her background.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Yep, my name's Rosie Taylor. I started about 2 weeks after Sarah, back in September as well. I also have a charity background, not quite as long as 20 years, I'm afraid, but I'm very passionate about mental health, both from a professional standpoint, but obviously I've also had a personal journey through it as well. So it's incredibly a powerful subject for me. I'm also a massive gamer as well, so being able to work within a charity that focuses on mental health through the power of gaming is perfect as a mix for me. But I'll pass you back to Sarah just to kind of talk to you a little bit about how the charity started and what Safe in Our World is all about.
Right, thank you. Yeah, so Safe in Our World is a really new charity. We've only been going for about 18 months. So how it started was back at one of the big gaming events, I believe in Shanghai a few years ago, where a group of industry folks started talking and started thinking about maybe raising some money for a mental health charity, mental health being very close to their hearts. So the conversation progressed. And as they started talking a bit more, they thought, how great would it be to set up our own charity and purely focus all our attention as looking after mental health within the gaming industry. And after many discussions, a lot of hard work on World Mental Health Day in October 2019, Safe in Our World was officially launched. And as they say, the rest is history. So what do we set out to do at Safe? What's our goal? And it's quite simple, really. We want to foster worldwide mental health awareness throughout the whole of the gaming industry. We want everybody to encourage people to reach out. We want to promote that positive dialogue. And we want to eliminate stigma, really, once and for all. There's so much stigma that relates to mental health conditions, and it's really time that we stood up and did something about it. So that's what Safe is aiming to do. We kind of are twofold. We are very, very interested in reaching out to the industry, which I'll tell you a little bit more about our Level Up campaign in a bit. But I think as our speakers previously have touched on, working in the video games industry can be tough. I know a recent UK survey suggested that if you work within the industry, you're 31% likely to suffer from a mental health condition, as opposed to 17% nationally. So that's a shocking statistic, and one that we take very seriously. So a lot of our focus is on the industry, but likewise gamers are so important too. You know, the end users, I mean, most of the people who work in the industry play games too. I think half the population game. There's a lot of us out there. And we know that gamers sort of look to video games as a safe haven, a refuge for many that might be suffering. And just as a general statistic, so many people will suffer. 77% of us in our lifetime will have some kind of condition, but not many of us will reach out and actually get the help that we need. So that's the ethos behind what Safe in Our World does. You can see on here, this is our mission, you know, and it really is to create a video game industry where every company looks out for the mental health of their staff and their talent, enabling employees to feel able to reach out when they need it. And likewise, for the gamers, a video game community that really is free from stigma and where every player feels safe and able to reach out. So that's a very whistle stop tour of what Safe in Our World sets out to do. And when it first came about in October 2019, the first thing we did was obviously launch a website, and it really is a fantastic hub of information. So I'm going to quickly pass back to Rosie to talk you through some of the great information and help that our website offers.
Thank you. So yeah, I just wanted to explain a little bit about our website and how it ties into what we're doing for both the industry and for gamers. And one of the first things that you'll see signposted on our website, not only on the title, but there's always a sidebar and it's always one click away on any page on our website, is the helplines. These are global, they cover a variety of different support that people might need, specific helplines, links for youth, for example, or LGBTQ+, or grief, or specific mental health disorders or symptoms and feelings. That we're always looking to update and expand these helplines and resources so that they're as inclusive and thorough as possible. And kind of tying into that, we also have our support and feelings information page, which offers information and guidance specific to scenarios or feelings or disorders that people might be experiencing or resonate with. And they're great, like short summaries almost for educating yourself or someone else on something that you might be unfamiliar with related to mental health. We also have a COVID-19 hub, which obviously last year was especially difficult for a lot of people, and we were all kind of thrown into situations that we weren't prepared for. And as part of a response to that, we've got a different number of resources that we're constantly updating on this page to provide support for people specifically with the pandemic and restrictions that come with it in mind. We've essentially tried to create a mixture of practical advice as well as real life applications and relatable content that I think resonates with people. And sometimes, you know, you don't just want to be reading about the things that you haven't managed to get the energy for, like going to the gym or going for a walk. You might just kind of want to read about how something as simple as games can help you set goals, or things that are more straightforward as that. And I think that mixture is really important as well. We also share charity news, so from our initiatives and events and Level Up, which Sarah mentioned slightly earlier that she's going to touch on in a few minutes. And we also have hero stories, which are pivotal to our website, in my opinion. I think it's so important that people are able to relate to figures within the industry, but also within the gaming space that have told a personal story about mental health. A lot of people have heroes or people that they look up to, and seeing someone of influence talking about mental health might just encourage someone else to speak up about theirs, which is so important. So that's one of them. We also not related to the website, but we've just launched a Discord called Safer Together, which is based around being able to connect people, not necessarily to talk about mental health, but everyone who has an interest in games in some way or another, whether they're in the industry or whether they're just a gamer. It's just a safe space to come and talk and discuss games or mental health or anything in between. And finally, I just wanted to talk a little bit about our games section. So we have a section on our website that's all about related games and apps to mental health. And we try as a charity to be able to do our best to give developers a platform to showcase best practice in games, and whether that practice is in the message that's in the game or accurate representation of mental health within games or the dynamics of a game, for example. And so there's plenty of games that feature on our website that don't really at first glance appear to be associated with mental health. So we've selected a lot of games that provide like a great escape for a bad day and things like that. So one of the stories that I wanted to talk about, or I will let someone else talk about very shortly, is actually a game called Fractured Minds, which is made by someone called Emily Mitchell. I won't talk about it too much because I don't think I'll do it justice, but the video will, I hope. So fingers crossed that you'll be able to hear this.
I think that you can just...
Let me just go back to the beginning.
I'm Emily Mitchell and I'm working on Fractured Minds. The thing that really appeals to me about video games is I think that you can just escape into another world and you can just kind of forget about everything else. So I just thought maybe I should make a game. I suffer from quite severe anxiety, so I wanted to make a game that actually means something and something that people can relate to, but in their own way, if that makes sense. So for me, the game is about anxiety, but for another person, it could be about depression or whichever mental health issue. I think I did the puzzle format because it was a good reflection of how mental health is in real life. So it's a struggle to open the door into the next room. If I had to describe anxiety in one word, it would probably be exhausting. Kind of feels like everything's going so fast that you can't catch your breath, but at the same time it's so slow that every second feels like 10 minutes. Having the BAFTA deadline, it gave me something to work towards and it really gave me motivation to actually do it. When I found out it had been shortlisted, it was actually my birthday, so it was like the best birthday ever, to be honest. On the actual day of the award ceremony, in the train station, I actually had a really bad panic attack. I was actually going to go home, but then I knew that if I didn't go, I would probably regret it for the rest of my life, so I went and then I won.
It is Fractured Minds by Emily Mitchell.
And that was like the best feeling in the whole world because it went from the worst day to the best day and it was just amazing. Having the game come out on console and PC and everything is just really exciting to have people actually play my game. I think that the Safe in Our World campaign is a really amazing idea because it's just building this support network around the gaming community, especially as a lot of young people play games. And because a lot of young people suffer from mental health issues, it'll be really nice for them to just know that they're not alone and there's a lot of help available for them. There's a lot of stigma around mental health. It's basically an invisible illness from the outside. So Fractured Minds is trying to allow people to experience what it's like, so maybe they can try and understand more and empathise more with people suffering from mental health issues.
So that was Emily Mitchell's Fractured Minds, and I won't go on too much more about it. So instead, what I'm going to do is pass you back to Sarah to talk about Level Up Mental Health.
Okay, thank you. How amazing is Emily? And it's thanks to Emily and some of the royalties from that video that we were able to launch SAFE in the very first instance. So it's huge thanks to Emily for kicking us off with that. Okay, so we launched our flagship initiative, Level Up Mental Health, back in May last year. So it's just turned a year old. And we've got 66 partners signed up, which is fantastic within 1 year. So what is Level Up Mental Health? It's basically our initiative that is calling the entire industry to unite, come together and start thinking about the mental health of its employees, its talents, and start to provide a safe and supportive environment. I think Dr. Lamb mentioned earlier about the difference between mental and physical health. You know, people will come to work in the office and they'll say they put their back out at the weekend or they twisted their ankle, but they won't come in and say that they're in a really dark place or they're suffering. And that's really what needs to change. And by the same token, a lot of offices will have a first aider, but not every office has a mental health first aider. So that's all part of the re-educating and giving some advice and support to as many companies as we can, to start taking it seriously, start to think about drawing up a charter or a policy. Just the first steps is often the hardest bit for a company that comes to me, is how do I get started? And the first thing you need to do is just commit to it and tell your staff you're doing it. And just to put that message out, we've joined Level Up and we are taking your mental health seriously. And we want you to feel comfortable to reach out if you need to. I think in the past, some companies have had a policy, but they've been reactive rather than proactive because something has happened. And we don't want that to happen. We want everybody to be proactive in thinking about mental health. And, you know, at the bottom line, it makes business sense too. You know, talent costs a lot of money to create. There's a lot of training, a lot of recruitment costs in taking people on. So let's look after the people that we've got and not lose them for mental health reasons. So as part of that, we worked in connection with Rethink Mental Health and we created a toolkit, which is free to everybody who joins Level Up, which in itself is free to join. All we ask is that within the first 12 months, you make a start on thinking about your mental health policy and commit to making change within your organisation. And that's a really helpful piece of kit, really. It gives you every step that you need to take to get from the very beginning through to the excellence level. Lots and lots of help and also legislation in there. Also, we have an array of industry specific training courses. And I think the industry specific is quite important because, as we know, our industry is different to many to work in. You know, we've talked many times about burnout and crunch culture. So, you know, the training that we offer is industry specific, and whether that's just awareness that all staff can go on, or whether it's training up mental health first aiders or mental health champions. We offer a lot of support and help with that. Very, very happy to be able to announce that we're about to launch our community manager training, which has been a while in the making because we wanted to make sure it was right. We reached out to a lot of community managers and asked them what are the issues they face on a daily basis. I think the community manager role has grown over the last few years and they've kind of got left behind. I think they often find themselves in quite toxic communities and people reaching out to them and I think they need some support and help. So we've created this course, and it's going to be quite a big course. There's 8 hours of mental health training. So to bring them pretty much up to mental health first aider level. And then the rest is focused on the skills you need to be able to manage your community without it affecting your own mental health, which is also really important. You know, you've got to look after yourself. Self-care isn't selfish. You need to look after yourself. So really, really happy to be launching that. And thanks to some money we raised last year, we're going to hope to train up between 150 to 200 community managers globally. And we had applications from all over the world, 20 different countries. Burnout, equally important. We're running some workshops thanks to one of our clinical board members is running that for us. So we've got lots and lots going on with training, but we just want to be able to support with as many resources as we can to the industry and create best practice. It's really good to be able to talk to each other. We've had some really nice testimonials from some of the companies who have done so much in creating their own charters and literally have a calendar of mental health events throughout the year to engage their staff and look after their staff. And one day I would like to create a community for Level Up partners so they can talk and share ideas. And finally, just help and advice, really. We're here to help you, whatever it is you need to get your policies up and running in organisations. We're here to help and point in the right direction if we can't help. So that, in a nutshell, is our Level Up Mental Health. And I think pretty much brings us to the end of our presentation. We will be over, oh, sorry, actually, I've forgotten. I'm just going to play the video. Got ahead of myself there. I've just looked at the clock and thought, oh no. So sorry, before I finish on Level Up Mental Health, we're just going to quickly watch a really nice video that's on our website that gives a little bit more information. And then we'll say goodbye and head over to the lounge. Thanks, Rosie.
The video games industry creates incredible worlds in which a huge number of vulnerable people find refuge. Safe in Our World's goal is to provide support, raise awareness, and change attitudes towards mental health issues in the real world, not only for the benefit of players, but also for those within our industry. In one country alone, nearly a third of those who work within the games industry live with anxiety, depression, or both. That's why Safe in Our World is calling on the global video games industry to level up mental health. Together, we can make fundamental changes to workplace culture and offer safety, support, and understanding to all employees who face challenges to the well-being of their mental health. To make this a reality, we're asking the global video games industry to take 3 simple steps. 1. Commit to taking measures to roll out a company-wide mental health support system within the next 12 months. 2. Join Safe in Our World as a partner and pledge to support mental health within the industry. 3. Help our efforts to make sure that our teams and those who play our games know where they can find support. To help companies understand the benefits of an active approach to mental health management and to assist in taking the right steps to achieve our goals, we are launching a mental health toolkit. Developed in collaboration with various healthcare experts and tailored for the games industry, it clearly and comprehensively highlights the skills and methods that will destigmatize mental health issues and create a supportive workplace culture. We're also proud to be able to offer approved mental health training courses that can be attended in person or viewed online. As my friend would say, it's time to talk. It's time to level up mental health. Visit safeinourworld.org and join today.
Right, thank you. Apologies
Now
for
we're
that.
done.
Now we're done. So I think we are going to head over into the for Q&A over in the industry lounge, I think is where it is. But thank you very much for your time.